Axis report.
This week, the world map didn't just change, it tilted. While you were likely distracted by the noise coming out of Davos, two islands effectively swapped places in the hierarchy of American power. On one side of the globe, we have the Chagos Archipelago, specifically Diego Garcia, a critical, unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean, a legacy asset. And according to President Trump this week, handing it over to Mauritius, a deal brokered by the UK was, and I quote, an act of great stupidity. Why? Because he knows what you know, that handover opens the door for Chinese surveillance right in the heart of the Indo-Pacific. But Trump didn't just complain about losing ground in the south. He went north. Less than 24 hours after blasting the UK for losing an island, the president walked onto a stage in Switzerland and announced he's effectively taking one. Not buying a condo, not building a golf course. He announced the Greenland Framework. Let's be clear about what just happened. This isn't the 2019 absurd idea that the media laughed at. This is 2026. The laughter is gone, replaced by a very specific kind of silence coming from Brussels. You are looking at the most aggressive real estate transaction in modern geopolitical history. We aren't just talking about land. We are trading a vulnerable outpost in the warm waters of the past for a fortress in the cold reality of the future. The United States is pivoting to the Arctic. Most analysts are looking at the price tag. They're asking, how much? That is the wrong question. The right question is, what is the physics of this deal? Because when you look at the trajectory of a hypersonic missile fired from the Eurasian steppe, it doesn't fly over Diego Garcia. It flies over the North Pole. Trump isn't buying ice. He's buying the only geography that matters for the Golden Dome missile defense shield he promised on the campaign trail. He traded a tropical headache for an Arctic shield. And he did it by holding a rhetorical gun to the head of the European economy. Welcome to the Arctic century. If you thought the Cold War was over, you were right. This is the Ice War. So how did we get from Greenland is not for sale to a signed framework in under 48 hours? To understand the mechanics of this deal, you have to look at the man who is arguably the most frustrated person in Davos right now, Volodymyr Zelensky. He coined a phrase yesterday that you need to add to your vocabulary immediately, Greenland mode. He wasn't talking about ice. He was talking about paralysis. Zelensky looked at the European leadership, stuttering, stalling, waiting for permission to act on Ukraine, on Iran, on trade, and he diagnosed them perfectly. Greenland mode is the state of frozen indecision, where the entire European Union pauses to see if Donald Trump is going to buy an island or blow up an alliance. And Trump knows this. He banks on it. Look at the timeline. It's a masterclass in manufactured chaos. January 20th. The Trump White House leaks that a blanket 25% tariff is coming for Denmark and select NATO allies. The reasoning: insufficient contribution to collective defense. The markets panic. The euro dips. The deadlines are set for February 1st. It is an economic death sentence for export-heavy economies. January 21st. Trump sits down with NATO Secretary Mark Rutte and Danish officials. Suddenly the mood shifts. The tariffs gone, the insults vanished. In their place emerges the framework. Do you see the play? He didn't negotiate for Greenland. He extorted it. He created a crisis, the tariff threat that could only be solved by giving him exactly what he wanted militarily. He offered Denmark a choice: economic ruin, or let the Americans build their golden dome on the ice sheet. NATO Secretary Rutte didn't bless this deal because he wanted to. He blessed it because he had to stop the bleeding. The official statement calls it a joint investment and security partnership. That's diplomatic speak for a landlord-tenant agreement where the tenant just bought the building. This is why the Davos crowd is so unsettled. They are used to predictable, slow-moving diplomacy. They are used to committees and working groups. They are not used to a president who treats the sovereignty of a semi-autonomous territory like a distressed asset in a bankruptcy auction. But here is the catch. While everyone is focused on the political victory lap Trump is taking, almost no one is reading the fine print of what this framework actually entails. We've pulled the preliminary data points, and when you strip away the peace and prosperity branding, you realize this deal isn't just about missiles. It's about something buried deep under that ice, something that China has a monopoly on, and the U.S. is desperate to seize. Trump didn't just buy a shield. He might have just cornered the market on the fuel of the 21st century. But to get it, he had to make a promise to Europe that he almost certainly cannot keep. What exactly did he trade away to get the keys to the Arctic? And why does the fine print suggest that this deal might actually trigger a constitutional crisis in Copenhagen by Monday morning? Let's dig into the invisible threads. So let's cut through the noise. What did we actually just buy? If you listen to the headlines, Trump bought an island. If you listen to the Danish Prime Minister, we merely signed a cooperative framework. The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the boring gray middle, and that is where the devil lives. We've parsed the language of the initial press releases, and here is the reality. The United States did not buy the freehold title to Greenland. We didn't just add a 51st star to the flag. What we likely secured is the geopolitical equivalent of a 99-year commercial lease with an option to buy. Think of it like the Hong Kong handover, but in reverse and with significantly more ice. The framework avoids the messy word sovereignty, which triggers the Danish constitution, and replaces it with exclusive security zones. This is a legal fiction that allows Denmark to keep the flag while the US gets the keys to the basement. Why go through this charade? Why threaten a trade war for a frozen rock? Because this deal isn't about land. It's about geometry and geology. Let's talk about the geometry first. This is the Golden Dome. For decades, our missile defense relied on shooting down ICBMs that travel in a predictable high arc, like a pop fly in baseball. But the game has changed. We are now in the era of hypersonic glide vehicles. These things don't fly high. They fly low and fast, skimming the upper atmosphere, maneuvering to avoid detection. Here is the physics problem. If you are trying to catch a hypersonic missile from Russia or China, you cannot wait for it to reach New York. By then, it's moving at Mach 10, and it's too late. You can't catch a bullet if you're standing behind the target. You have to be standing in front of the gun. Greenland is the only piece of real estate on Earth that sits directly in the path of a polar strike. We already have Thule Air Base up there. It's legendary. But one base is a pinprick. The framework likely authorizes the expansion of that footprint into a distributed network of interceptor sites across the northern ice sheet. Trump isn't building a wall this time. He's building a ceiling. But if the Golden Dome is the shield, the second part of this deal is the sword. And this is the part the Europeans are terrified to talk about. Let's talk about geology. Underneath that melting ice lies the largest undeveloped deposit of rare earth elements in the Western Hemisphere: neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. I know. It sounds like gibberish from a chemistry textbook. But let me translate. These are the vitamins of the modern world. You cannot build an F-35 fighter jet, an electric vehicle battery, or an iPhone without them. Here is the kicker. China currently controls 90% of the processing capacity for these minerals. For the last 10 years, Beijing has had a chokehold on the US defense industry. If they turn off the tap, our assembly lines stop. It is that simple. Now connect the dots back to Act 1. Remember the act of great stupidity. The Chagos Islands critics are screaming that losing Diego Garcia to Mauritius is a disaster because it lets China into the Indian Ocean. And they're right, it is a loss for surveillance. But look at the trade-off Trump just made. He sacrificed a listening post in the tropics, which primarily watches trade routes to secure the supply chain in the Arctic. He is trading a legacy asset for a future resource monopoly. The Greenland Framework almost certainly includes joint exploration rights. That is code for American mining companies are coming and Chinese companies are banned. This is why he paused the tariffs. The tariffs were the stick. The framework is the carrot. He told Europe, "I won't tax your cars, but in exchange you must let me lock China out of the Arctic." It is a containment strategy disguised as a real estate deal. However, and this is a massive however, we need to be the adults in the room here. A framework is not a treaty. It is a handshake. In the corporate world, this is called a letter of intent. It calms the shareholders, or in this case the markets, but it hasn't passed due diligence. The Danish Prime Minister is currently spinning this as a victory for NATO unity. But the reality in Copenhagen is much uglier. Greenland has its own local government, the Naalakkersuisut. They have historically been very protective of their environment and very skeptical of uranium mining. Trump might have shaken hands with the Danes, but he hasn't signed a lease with the Greenlanders. And under the Self-Government Act of 2009, Copenhagen cannot force Nuuk to accept uranium mining. So here is the friction point. We have a US president who thinks he just bought the rights to the future, and a local indigenous government that might just say no to the excavators. What happens then? Does the Board of Peace send in lawyers? Or does the Golden Dome get built by force? This brings us to the most unsettling realization of the deep dive. This deal assumes that laws still work the way they used to. But if the last 48 hours have taught us anything from the tariff threats to the island swapping, it's that the old rule book has been shredded. We are watching the privatization of geopolitics. Agreements are made in Davos backrooms, announced on Truth Social, and the details are filled in later by panicked bureaucrats. Europe is paralyzed because they are trying to play chess while Trump is playing a hostile takeover. And while everyone is looking north at the ice, something much hotter is brewing in the east. Because you can't pause a war in the Middle East just because you're busy shopping in the Arctic. Or can you? Let's look at the ripple effect. Because while the ink is drying on the Greenland deal, the pause button on Iran is about to get stuck. While the world was busy looking up at the ice, they missed what happened on the ground in Tehran. And this is where the art of the deal gets significantly darker. Earlier this week, the president warned the Iranian regime that help was on the way for the protesters filling the streets. The markets braced for airstrikes. The Pentagon moved assets. And then, silence. An unexpected pause. Why the hesitation? Why pivot to the Arctic with such aggression while hitting the brakes in the Persian Gulf? Because in the logic of this administration, resource allocation is a zero-sum game. You cannot pivot to the Arctic, a great power competition with China, if you are bogged down in another trillion-dollar quagmire in the Middle East. So Trump didn't send missiles to Iran. He sent something far more destructive yet invisible to the naked eye. He deployed the economic warhead, the final 25% tariff. The order is brutal in its simplicity. Any nation, any corporation, any bank that facilitates trade with the Iranian regime will face an immediate non-negotiable 25% tariff on their access to the US market. He is outsourcing the siege. He is effectively saying to China and Europe, I am not going to police the Persian Gulf anymore. You are going to police it for me, or you lose the American consumer. This is the ripple effect. The Greenland Framework and the Iran pause are not separate stories. They are two sides of the same doctrine. In the north, he secures the assets defense plus minerals. In the south, he withdraws the military and replaces it with economic coercion. And this is where the economic miracle speech at Davos becomes the linchpin. Trump stood on that stage and bragged about low inflation and high growth, not just to pat himself on the back, but to show his hand. He is betting that the U.S. economy is so robust that he can afford to bully the world, while Europe's economy is so fragile, so stuck in Greenland mode, that they have no choice but to comply. He is weaponizing the U.S. GDP. The losers in this equation, the Iranian people who are about to see their currency, the rial, turn into confetti, and European businesses who are now caught in a vice between American tariffs and their own energy needs. The pause isn't mercy. It's a suffocation strategy. And unlike a missile strike, you can't take a picture of it so it doesn't make the evening news. Which brings us to the absurd, almost literary conclusion of this week. To manage this brave new world, the White House has announced the formation of a Board of Peace. I wish I was making that name up. It sounds like a shadow organization from a Marvel movie. It allegedly brings together world leaders like Trump and Netanyahu to oversee conflict resolution. This is the final nail in the coffin of traditional diplomacy. We are witnessing the privatization of foreign policy. No more UN resolutions. No more multilateral working groups. Just a board of directors deciding which islands get traded and which regimes get starved. It is efficient, it is fast, and it is incredibly dangerous. So where does that leave us? Here is my forecast for the next 48 hours. Watch the Danish press. The Greenland Framework was rushed through to stop a trade war. I predict that by Monday, a draft of the agreement will leak revealing that the US demands override local Greenlandic law. This will trigger a massive legal battle between Nuuk, Greenland's capital, and Copenhagen. The deal is signed, but it is not sealed. The Iran pause is a trap. As the new tariffs hit, the Iranian regime will realize they are being strangled. Desperate regimes do not fade away quietly. They lash out. Expect a maritime incident in the Strait of Hormuz within the week. Trump is betting he can starve them out. They will try to prove him wrong by setting the oil fields on fire. The Iran pause is a trap. As the new tariffs hit, the Iranian regime will realize they are being strangled. Desperate regimes do not fade away quietly. They lash out. Expect a maritime incident in the Strait of Hormuz within the week. Trump is betting he can starve them out. They will try to prove him wrong by setting the oil fields on fire. This is the signal amidst the noise. Stay critical.